I finally spoke Japanese to a Japanese person. Now, yesterday, because I'm currently working at a golf shop in my town, these customers, it was, I think, two ladies and their grandson, I'm assuming, and with the Asian complexion, I was there doing the front desk and then I could hear them speaking Japanese. And it was finally my opportunity to actually practice what I've been learning for like the past couple of months. No, past years or so, since studying Japanese in high school and probably having the regret of speaking more Japanese when I was over in Japan. I spoke. It was terrible. Like, it wasn't terrible. It was the equivalent of broken English from an Asian. Simple words in present tense, not the right tense, but I managed to get the language through. And I managed to have like a small conversation saying, last year I graduated, I studied Japanese, even mentioning the price of the drink that they were buying and the golf club that they were buying. I managed to communicate that and I was quite excited. And in this video, I'm actually here to say 3 points about learning Japanese and speaking Japanese and actually applying it. Firstly, how I find with the experience of speaking a foreign language or your second language. For now, it's almost like going up on stage. If you've ever been a musician, you know that feeling of going up on stage. It's the initial, you can either see it as anxiety or excitement. And actually, it tends to be a little bit of anxiousness, but it's actually how I word it, is excitement. It's when I heard them speaking Japanese, when I know it wasn't Korean or Chinese, because you can tell the difference between the languages if you studied language enough. It was almost like, finally, it's like I'm performing. When I'm speaking, I'm performing. It's like doing mental gymnastics. Not like with your native language. It's not really mental gymnastics. Well, to some extent, if you don't know how to socialize or how to speak properly or articulate your ideas. It was mental gymnastics I didn't convert, like the main point of learning a second language is you don't want to actually be speaking the thought or thinking the thoughts in your head with your native language and then having to translate it to the foreign language. Like I said, 卒業. Like, I didn't have to think, oh, I graduated last year, then have to translate it. So that's that performance of having to think on the fly and speaking. And again, anxious, obviously, because you don't want to make any mistakes or look like a fool for not being able to speak their native language, but at least giving it a try and actually applying what you've learnt for the past couple of years studying the language is exciting, because finally you're able to have somewhat of a conversation and understand what they're saying. That's the amazing part. That's the exciting part. Because they thought I was Japanese, but I said no, like, I'm not. ちょっと日本語を話すことができる. Like, again, even my, because I'm a shop assistant and they're customers, I should be using like keigo, like not so casual, like, what's the casual form of the language? Because there's like formal, casual, keigo, and these things, like being able to understand them, that they were, instead of speaking English, like I spoke some English, like a little bit of English and Japanese, so they were speaking like simple Japanese that I was able to understand them, which they might have felt more comfortable, but again, it was more exciting for me to learn off them. And my second point is reflecting upon this experience is I probably have the regret of not speaking enough Japanese when I was over in Japan at the end of grade 9. Or if you know, end of grade 9, I had a school trip over to Japan and we spent 10 days like in Tokyo, Hiroshima, we went to Nikko, Shibuya, Akihabara, Shinjuku, like all these places, and I probably have the regret of not using enough Japanese or starting conversations, because with the thing with Japanese, they study English as a school subject. Like, their English is pretty damn good. Like, it's good enough that they can communicate with themselves, not to a native level. There were a couple of Japanese guys we've encountered that they were almost at native proficiency with their English, but they can speak it enough where if there's a foreign tourist, they can communicate what needs to be communicated. And and I tried speaking Japanese a little bit, like even here or there. Like I remember a moment when we went to a sushi bar. It was with like one of the juniors. I think he was in must have been grade 8, the grade below me. We just went by ourselves. His name was Connor and myself. We went to the sushi bar and they gave us beer instead of water. So trying to use the Japanese, they can speak good English. Like it's like sorry, like instead of saying sumimasen, like sumimasen, like mizu, like this should be water, but it was beer. It's like oh sorry, like those things, like those little things, like that's where I get the joy out of using the language. It's actually reading, being able to understand, communicate. I find those things, again, back to point number 1, exciting. And I should have spoken more Japanese when I was over at Japan, but that's not like the problem. Is their English is pretty damn good that you don't have to really speak Japanese. But still, that probably is a regret. So I'm looking forward to more interactions being able to speak Japanese. My third point is, again, it's almost like the rewards for your work, for your studying, for your diligence, for your continuous daily habit of doing your Anki studies, doing your flashcard studies, watching your input, like these things. Do it so diligently that eventually, it's like practice with music. Again, I do it with the analogy of music. Probably the better analogy with language is like a martial art. You can't be so stiff. Like, again, I think of it as music, because music is also a language. Because martial arts, you have to be on your feet. You can't think so rigidly. You have to have a flow. But it's the same with music. You have to have a flow. You can't be so rigid with your body, because it will reflect in the music. How you interpret the notes, how you interpret the intonation, the tempo, like all these things can communicate so many ideas. And with music, before you go up on stage, you have to practice. Whether it is doing your scales, which is, how do I explain it to a non-musician? The key that you're playing in, so basically how the song sounds, it's the bass, like it's the basic 8 notes that goes up in a scale, like starting from C to octave C, which is the high C, which is, again, if you're not a non-musician, you repeat the same, basically, I think A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Same 8 notes, but there's just a higher pitch. You have to practice, do your scales, practice slowly, study the music, listen to other people play the music. Draw that in, like that's how I see language. And then once you start speaking the language or writing the language, doing output, that's when you're performing on stage. Where it's different when you're reading, when you're listening. Those inputs, that's like practicing. So being able to use the language and output is performing. And that's as a musician, I think, spending those countless hours practicing, even though you might get to go on stage only for 10 or 20 minutes to play and perform. For some musicians, and probably some language learners ourselves, like those 10 or 20 minutes is worth the hours of practice. Because again, it's about the input, the process of being able to study, of being proficient enough that you can perform. So that's sort of my reflection points about having this small interaction or speaking Japanese to some Japanese people over in a golf shop. And again, I cannot express my enthusiasm. Of course, I was a bit anxious about if they're going to say something that I don't know how to say or I can't interpret, but it was pretty simple language that was all, not probably just to kill the ego. It's like they were talking, you could probably like simple English language you could be talking to like a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, like a toddler can understand. But again, that little moment, that little experience, all those hours of practice, years of study at school, studying Japanese, like that was worth it. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I hope the value that you get from this video is, again, if you're a language learner, stick to the process. And then eventually, once you do have the opportunity or the chance to use what you've learned, it's going to be fun, exciting, a bit anxious, but it's the same as performing. That's sort of the analogy I want to give. So I hope this video helps.